Union bosses selling out their workers. That is the topic of tonight's Byline. Canada's largest private sector union has called for a nationwide moratorium on the fastest growing form of oil and gas extraction in Canada. If this campaign, launched by Unifor head honcho Jerry Dias, is successful, it will mean fewer jobs for thousands upon thousands of unionized workers. So we have another story of a union boss trying to make sure that their members do not work. And I'm betting that once again, the reply of labor leaders across the country will be, well, Lily's just anti-union. That was the response from many when I pointed out that the United Steelworkers are campaigning against Keystone XL and other pipeline work, despite the fact that pipelines are made from steel. When I pointed out that Dave Coles, president of the Communication and Energy and Paper Workers, campaigned against Keystone, I was called anti-union by labor leaders and their supporters. And of course, it was the same reaction from many when I pointed out the insanity of Unifor, which is a merger of the auto workers and the energy workers, hiring Naomi Klein to speak at their founding convention. Klein, of course, is an opponent of oil, period, and campaigns for fewer cars. All of these are examples of union leadership using the dues money from hardworking Canadians to campaign against the very jobs the union leaders are supposed to represent. So now Jerry Dias has put out a news release calling for a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. It says unconventional gas fracking has the potential to have catastrophic effects on our environment and economy. The safety risks are also a major concern for our union. Just because we can carry out this activity does not mean we should. We must enact a national moratorium on fracking activity. Now, notice how Dias calls it unconventional gas fracking. He's trying to make it seem like this is some newfangled way of getting oil and gas out of the earth, and therefore it's dangerous. The claim is that fracking, well, it poisons the water system. That claim has appeared in propaganda movies out of Hollywood, but is that actually the case? Rather than listen to me or quote anyone associated with the industry, let's listen to what the head of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, a woman appointed by President Barack Obama, had to say about fracking and the water supply.
Not aware of any proven case where the fracking process itself has affected water.
Not a single case. Fracking has been going on since the 1940s and not a single case of water contamination. Not even in the recent past, when environmental activists have been hunting for such cases. Often they've invented bogus cases not supported by science. So I come back to a fundamental question. Why is Unifor doing this? The union proudly boasts in the news release calling for a fracking moratorium that they are, quote, Canada's largest energy union. Yet here they are campaigning against energy jobs. This would be like the United Food and Commercial Workers campaigning against grocery stores. It doesn't make sense. There was a time when unions fought for jobs in their industries, and some still do, but apparently Unifor has a higher purpose. This is from their constitution. Our goal is to change our workplaces and our world. Our vision is compelling. It is to fundamentally change the economy with equality and social justice, restore and strengthen our democracy, and achieve an environmentally sustainable future. So essentially, if you're a member of this union, doesn't matter about your job, you're going to be supporting their socialist politics, regardless of what your own views might be. If Unifor is successful in getting a nationwide ban on fracking based on faulty science and false claims, well, Dias will not only be denying jobs to Unifor members across Canada, but also put a crimp on manufacturing jobs in Ontario and Quebec, many of them unionized. In those provinces, well, that's where the equipment used in fracking is often made. Unions are always calling for governments to do something to create more jobs. Well, here's a fresh idea for today's union bosses. Stop using dues monies paid by your members to campaign against the jobs your members already have or want. I know there are lots of union men and women that watch this show. If you are one of them, do yourself a favor. Take your union back from radicals that put their politics above your jobs. And that's the Byline.
Jobs! Jobs! Union jobs! Union jobs!
Joining me now for further discussion on this is Lauren Gunter, who's long covered oil issues and radical environmentalist. And Lauren, this to me appears to be another case of union leadership looking to a fashionable cause rather than looking out for the needs of their members.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no denying that's exactly what this is. Too often in the last 30 years, union leaders have become more interested in advancing socialist ideologies and political agendas than in finding good paying jobs for their members and preserving those jobs. I mean, this is killing the goose that lays your golden egg. This is biting the hand that feeds you. I mean, you can think of all the cliches you want. It's exactly what it is. You have union leadership that is saying somehow, some way, fracking in the last few years has changed significantly and is now too dangerous for us to contemplate. They're more, they listen more to the radical environmentalists than they do to their own members.
How long's fracking been going on in Alberta? I'm going to guess decades.
Almost 70 years. And,
almost 70
across North America, there are 1.5 million fracking wells. 1.5 million. And as you correctly point out, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is no friend of the oil industry, cannot find a single instance where a fracking well has harmed groundwater.
Despite Gasland and Promised Land and all these propaganda movies, I mean, the people in Gasland were told that their water, I don't know if you've seen Frack Nation, but they were told that their water was not contaminated. They threw a fit. And they were told by their local Environmental Protection Agency officials. They threw a fit. That's the type of thing that's held up by people like Jerry Dias to say, oh, well, we've got to have a moratorium. It's a false premise.
There's nothing as dangerous as a liberal leftist with a bad idea. Because as soon as they have that idea in their heads, no amount of proof is ever going to dissuade them. In fact, they are so convinced that they are right on every issue that they actually start to think up names like denier for people who put contrary evidence in front of them. Oh, no, you're a denier. You're a bad person simply because you won't go along in blind faith with what it is that we're sure is happening. Don't confuse us with the fact.
And to add to the fashionable nature of it, we're looking at pictures from Moncton Anti-Fracking, the protest down in Rexton, where again this week they got in the way of the trucks of SWN Resources and blocked them from going in to do testing. This adds to the fashionable nature of the cause because you get to say, well, we're aligning with First Nations. Not all First Nations in British Columbia, they are benefiting from it and profiting from it and getting jobs from it. Same in north of you in Alberta.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, one thing that one other thing a lot of people don't understand. This isn't exactly on fracking, but it has to do with the oil industry and First Nations. Almost 1/5 of all the jobs. Almost 1/5 of all the income for First Nations in Canada, aside from government money. So all the private money that goes into First Nations, over 15% is related to the oil sands. Because the oil sands has had a policy for 30 years of trying to do business where it can with First Nations owned companies. And so somewhere between 15 and 18% of all of the income for First Nations businesses and First Nations individuals in Canada comes from the oil sands.
Unbelievable. So I want to show that the oil industry spreads the wealth across the country as well, and particularly Ontario and Quebec. And I want to show this because that's ground zero for opposition to things like fracking, opposition to the oil. So this is Ontario Capital Investments, manufacturing and sales, all related back to the oil and gas industry. This is by the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. More than $80 million worth of industrial machinery related to oil sands purchases. About $50 million worth of iron and steel mill investment due to the oil industry, oil and gas in this country. Architectural and structural metals, more than 20 million petroleum refinery steel product. It goes on. I just want to bring up Quebec quickly before we run out of time. And more than 20 million on architectural and structural metals in Quebec. Big petroleum industry there of more than 15 million. Non-ferrous metals, about 12 to 15 million, and it goes on. This will disappear if you get what many on the left want, which is doing away with oil and gas exploration. Let's stop it because it hurts Canada's reputation. Who's going to put food on the plate then?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and who's going to fire up your hairdryer in the morning when there's no oil and gas anymore? This is just so ridiculous. I mean, it's this disconnect between the production of energy and the consumption of it that is very similar now to what's happened under urbanization, where people no longer understand where their food comes from. They don't understand where their energy comes from either.
Good analogy, Lorne. Great talking to you. We'll chat again soon.
You bet, Brian.